President George Bush has acknowledged that thousands of people were killed in the series of attacks in which hijacked airliners were flown deliberately into landmark buildings on Tuesday. Speaking from the White House, President George Bush said the victims' lives had been ended by evil. He said world leaders would stand together to win the war against terrorism.
It's a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
The events, which began to unfold more than 12 hours ago, have stunned the world in an unprecedented display of violence and devastation. Two hijacked passenger planes flew directly into the sides of the twin skyscrapers of the World Trade Center during Tuesday morning's rush hour. Both towers caught fire immediately and later collapsed, sending clouds of dust and billowing smoke into Manhattan as people frantically tried to escape.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed a light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. Do you want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Shortly after the first two strikes, another hijacked Boeing passenger plane crashed near the Pentagon building in Washington, the headquarters of the American military. The building burst into flames and part of its five-sided structure collapsed. A fourth airliner also crashed in Pennsylvania, again after apparently being hijacked. The FBI has begun compiling evidence about the people who died on several of the stricken aircraft. The American Attorney General John Ashcroft says a passenger on the plane which crashed into the Pentagon rang her husband twice on her mobile phone. She's reported to have said that hijackers armed with knives took over the controls. International leaders around the world have condemned the attacks, among them the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon.
I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil. At this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one with the American people.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, completely shocked.
Meanwhile, American forces around the world have been placed on the highest alert and warships have been deployed along the US East Coast. Suspicion has fallen on Islamic militant groups, including those associated with the Saudi exile Osama bin Laden, already wanted by the Americans. The Taliban authorities in Afghanistan, where Mr. bin Laden is based, say he didn't have the capability for such a huge operation. Many world governments have also ordered defense alerts and called emergency security meetings.
Before we go to Jerusalem to speak to our correspondent, let me bring you up to date with some news just in from New York City, where the mayor there, Rudolph Giuliani, says some people are still alive in the World Trade Center, in spite of the fact that both towers are completely destroyed. Mayor Giuliani is saying there are some people still alive, and as we get more details on that story, of course, we'll bring them to you. But first to the Middle East. Israeli tanks and bulldozers have entered the Palestinian-controlled city of Jenin in the northern West Bank. There is said to have been a heavy exchange of gunfire between Israeli troops and Palestinian gunmen. Israeli tanks had previously encircled Jenin in an operation which Israeli forces say was intended to prevent suicide bombers reaching Israel. Well, we can get more details now from Jerusalem and our correspondent, Caroline Hawley. Caroline, is this just coincidental to the events in the United States?
Very hard to say. We have no word from the Israeli army about why they've decided to go into Jenin now, some 24 hours after they encircled the town, blocking all the roads in and out of it, saying that they wanted to prevent further suicide bombers coming out of Jenin. after an Israeli Arab who was responsible for a suicide bombing attack in Israel on Sunday was accused by the Israelis of hiding in the town.
Has there been any word from the Israeli authorities as to who they think will have been responsible for the outrage in the United States?
No, there hasn't at the moment. What the Israelis are saying is that the attacks in the United States prove the need for an international war against terrorism, and they are prepared to help fight it. They say, we understand that the CIA has already contacted Israeli intelligence officials and are asking for their help in tracking down the perpetrators. Israeli rescue teams are also, we understand, being dispatched to the United States, and Israelis are giving blood. There is a very strong identification here in Israel with the American victims of this attack.
As for the Palestinian community, one wonders which was the true reaction, the people who were seen clapping and cheering in part of Jerusalem, or the reaction of Yasser Arafat, who was visibly shocked.
He was visibly shocked. Very, very strong condemnation from him. But as you say, there were some Palestinians celebrating, giving out sweets and shooting into the air, traditional signs of celebration here. But I was in East Jerusalem late last night, and people there were really shaking their heads in disbelief, saying that it was a terrible thing. And we know that the Palestinian Authority is very upset with these demonstrations of celebration and tried to prevent them. I think there is a sense among the Palestinians that that this is a terrible thing. There's also, though, a lot of anger, both among the Palestinians and across the Arab world, against the United States for its support for Israel during the current conflict here. And Palestinians are accusing the Americans of providing the Israelis with the weapons to attack them. So I think there's a lot of anger at the United States, but I don't think that translates across the board into support for this, although we have seen some celebrations of the attacks.
There must be a certain amount of concern about possible retaliation as well, because the only claim that there has been so far for this has been allegedly on behalf of a Palestinian group.
That's right. It was a call, an anonymous call made to an Arab station in the name of the DFLP, a Palestinian group. It was very, very quickly denied, but certainly attention has focused on the Middle East. That's right. But other groups as well have disassociated themselves. Islamic Jihad and Hamas, militant groups fighting the Israeli occupation and fighting Israel with suicide bombings inside Israel. Both say that this kind of attack is the result of American policy towards the Middle East, but they have disassociated themselves from it. But Israel is now on a high state of alert. We understand that land borders have been closed. The Israeli authorities have ordered that no foreign plane should fly in or out of the country, and the Red Cross also, the Israeli Red Cross is on, or it's actually the Red Star here is on a high state of alert.
Caroline Hall in Jerusalem, thank you very much.
Well, as we've been seeing, President George W. Bush made a television address to the American people a few hours ago. He said he would do everything to bring those responsible to justice. Let's see what he had to say in full.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you, good night, and God bless America.
So, as we just saw, President Bush promised to find those responsible for the attacks and bring them to justice. Bill Hayton now looks at his options.
The wreckage at the Pentagon is still being cleared and the human cost still being counted. America's military headquarters has now suffered the horror inflicted on many army bases and embassies abroad over the past 2 decades. The sheer military might controlled from this building has made direct military attacks against the United States all but impossible. Instead, its enemies have turned to so-called asymmetric warfare, small-scale operations with dramatic effects, such as last year's bomb attack on the USS Cole in Yemen. Washington has responded in 2 ways, by court action against those it believes responsible, and also by direct military retaliation.
And I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
When Osama bin Laden's group bombed the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 3 years ago, killing more than 220 people, the response was dramatic. More than 80 cruise missiles were fired at sites in Afghanistan and Sudan, allegedly connected to his organization. They killed 20 people but missed bin Laden himself. The actual bombers were extradited to the US, and last May 4 men were convicted in New York and sentenced to life in jail. But retaliation doesn't always hit the right targets. In 1986, after 2 American soldiers were blown up in a Berlin nightclub, US planes bombed Libya, though it was later suggested that Syrian agents had been responsible. And Washington is being sued for millions of dollars by a businessman whose Sudanese factory was destroyed by a cruise missile after it was wrongly linked to bin Laden.
if they reflect on these questions, and if they look at the source of the resentment and the Arab words and Muslim words, I believe there wouldn't be any attack. But sending